Hello, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Meriwether and Tharp, and we're glad to have you with us. And by the way, if you check in on all these video platforms here, you'll see there's a QR code. I have no idea how QR codes work. I have no idea, technically speaking, how that QR code's even on the screen right now. All of this is very new technology for me, but here's what I do know. This is the Lousy Stinking Gators t-shirt. Now, how awesome is this? You're getting ready for Georgia, Florida coming up in a couple of weeks now. There's a hated rival on Saturday, too, with the Deep South's oldest. But you got the Lousy Stinking Gators right here. You want to get ready to show off that, heading towards what's going to go down at the end of this month against the Lousy Stinking Gators. We can show the Lousy Stinking Gators just how lousy and stinking they are with this great Lousy Stinking Gators t-shirt. And if you access that QR code right there, you can get yourself one of these or the Eddie the Blind Squirrel t-shirt or all the other fun stuff there too. So that's really cool stuff at the brand new DawgNation store. You can find it at DawgNation.store or at the top of the page of DawgNation.com, or simply just click that QR code to be a part of this and get your Lousy Stinking Gators t-shirt. That's really fun. All right, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to take like one or two more comments from our DawgNation.com folks. We're kind of finishing up our first and 15 there, DawgNation.com, the DawgNation app. Then after that, we are going to get into the show. You kind of already know what we're going to start with today. Brandon Council, Auburn offensive lineman, big talk from him, boasting, trash talk, if you will. I think the Georgia response to this is going to be pretty interesting, and I think it's got to come on two fronts, two very different sides of maybe the same kind of coin. We're going to talk more about that here coming up in a moment. Let me get a couple more comments before we get there. Dietrich Frazier says Kirby's probably pretty happy, he says, about his team. He's got a talented, battle-tested team with a high ceiling. Yeah, I've never gotten the impression that Kirby dislikes this team. And some years, coaches, as you know, some of you are coaches, you certainly have a little bit more insight into this. At different points, different coaches sort of like their teams, more than others. And I've gotten the impression that Kirby obviously understands that he had a very special team here in 2021, but I don't think that Kirby sees a great deal of deficiency when he looks at this team right now. There are just some things, as Dietrich's phrase used, from a battle-tested standpoint, from a fully experienced standpoint. Maybe you're still trying to get some of that for Georgia. But I think you got the impression right now that Kirby probably feels pretty good about his team. Remember, all of this is kind of like a work in progress. And all of this is about doing this week what can be done this week as a stair step towards what you hope to do in future weeks. That Georgia's not really any different than any other team in the country when it comes to all of that. Bobby checking in to say sorry to hear about all the injuries the Dogs are facing right now. Never a good time to have injuries, but we at least get them back when we get the meat of the schedule. Kirby won't rush in getting some of these players back. Better to rest them and get them 100%. I do think that's one of the things that Kirby is good at. I think that Kirby is patient with injured players, because here's like the one thing I've sort of learned from watching football, and I'm not an expert on anything, but certainly not health. Like, I'm not a medical professional at all. But the one thing I've kind of learned is, let's say your starter is your A-level player and your backup is your B-level player. 100% of a B-level player is probably more effective than 80% of an A-level player. That's what I've sort of figured out, that we always kind of discuss, well, is so-and-so going to play or not? But sometimes when you put a guy out there and he's less than 100%, you are getting less than that A-level performance from that guy. And so a lot of times you see Georgia kind of functioning this way too. It's like, you can circle any injured player. Let's say it's A.D. Mitchell right now, because that's the guy we kind of, maintain some curiosity about. In a couple of weeks, it may be, Jalen Carter there as well. Carter's Georgia's best player, but less than 100% of Jalen Carter isn't actually Jalen Carter. And A.D. Mitchell may be Georgia's best wide receiver, but less than 100% version of A.D. Mitchell isn't the same Mitchell that has proven himself to be so valuable for the Dogs. So that's part of the reason why I believe that Smart is patient when it comes to injuries. And sometimes it seems like you almost give the guy the extra week on that, or in some cases it's almost like you give the guy sort of an extra year to be back to his full self again, because an injury to an A-level player makes that player less than an A-level type guy. So yeah, that's indeed the case. We got a lot of comments. We'll do a little bit of a longer version of our R.S. Andrews cooldown at the end of the show. We didn't get to do much of a cooldown yesterday, just simply because of the fact that I had to step away from work for a little while, but glad to be back in the saddle again today. Glad to be talking to all of you, and really ready for Georgia-Auburn on Saturday. Deep South's oldest rivalry. Doesn't get more fun than that. We are locked in on it and ready to go. Terence Edwards stops by today there as well. And, of course, he'll be with us for the DawgNation postgame show coming up on Saturday evening. So let's get laser-focused on a bunch of stuff. In addition to the Auburn trash talk, we're also going to get a little bit deeper into the Darnell Washington topic today. That's something that's been on the mind of a lot of Georgia fans. And there's something about Darnell that I don't think you can miss. This is really, really important. I'm going to share it with you today. So we're going to do a bunch and have a good time doing it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Meriwether and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
There are some moments when we sort of all think the same thing, and I think yesterday was one of those. By now, you sort of know, I'm sure, what we're going to begin the show with today. An Auburn offensive lineman named Brandon Council has really shot off his mouth about his group against Georgia coming up on Saturday. And I was kind of out of pocket for a little bit yesterday. I had some stuff I had to take care of and kind of away from like the news cycle, if you will, for lack of a better way to say this. And so I was a little late to the party on seeing what Council had said. But when I saw it, I was immediately like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing ever for Georgia. Did Kirby Smart pay this guy to say this? And actually, Barry Watkins, who's one of our frequent commenters on Facebook, kind of responded back to me on Twitter and said, no, I think the Auburn boosters paid him to say that. Because, this is one of those deals where very few people take this at face value. Very few people take trash talk like this from a team like Auburn, a player that plays for Auburn, as, oh, wow, maybe Auburn's better than I thought they were. Maybe they really do have something for Georgia. Pretty much everybody kind of takes this as whatever the opposite of rat poison is. If rat poison is praise that's bad for you, this is kind of criticism that's good for you in the minds of a lot of people. Of all of a sudden now, Georgia, who's probably already motivated anyway, coming back home, playing a rival, big crowd, CBS television, all of a sudden now you've got a little bit more motivation to get ready for the game coming up on Saturday. It was amazing to me just almost universal that opinion was. Even people that were more like national media types and not Georgia fans, they all seem to view this as a pretty bad thing for Auburn that a dude shut off his mouth the way that he did. If you're not familiar with what he said, let me remind you here, and you can read the full story about this at DawgNation.com that unearths the quotes from the Auburn media folks, and then we're going to talk about what this means from a Georgia perspective. Let me show you the first one here. This is Brandon Council, an Auburn offensive lineman, talking about his team's ability to run the football. He says, I believe just them being able to, like their third down package, they got some interior stunts that kind of hinders the run game, but we're going to start off fast. If you start off fast, run the ball on them, and keep them out of their third down packages. Now listen to this. This is the big line. If this were a blockbuster Hollywood movie, this would be the pull quote that kind of goes the top of the poster. He says, really, we could demolish them. I personally believe up front. Well, I guess if you personally believe it, then maybe it must be true. But how about a guy who plays for Auburn who's a 30-point underdog in the game on Saturday saying, we could demolish them? There's a guy named Justin Ferguson who covers Auburn, and he put on Twitter yesterday that Football Outsiders has just published their new offensive line stats for 2022. It takes a few weeks for them to feel comfortable publishing that because in the early stages, there are just lots of potential variants that could change week to week. But by the time you get to about this point, almost to the halfway point of the regular season, it kind of stabilizes itself a little more. And Justin kind of put out the numbers. Like, Auburn's terrible. Like, their offensive line stats are horrible, as you would expect a team that's pretty bad overall to be. But nonetheless, Brandon Council looks across the field at Georgia on Saturday and says, this looks like a team that we are able to demolish. Which you can insert your own laugh line. Everybody kind of understands that's ridiculous and a joke. He actually wasn't done. He said a little bit more, too. Let me show you one more quote from Council here. Then I want to kind of get into this a little bit more. He says, our goal is to go in there like a SWAT team. Get in, quiet the noise, and then get out. Now, pardon me for noticing, but ponder just for a minute here the absurdity of this. Is that his whole point here is we're going to sneak in. They're not even going to know we're coming. We're going to sneak in there, and we're going to silence that crowd, and then we're going to sneak out before they even know what hit them. Okay, so even if for a minute that was true, let's use the wildest corner of our imagination to say that what Council's saying actually is true. Haven't you just ruined that by announcing it like 3 days before the game? I mean, like, this is the absurdity of the comment. Like his whole thing of, we're going to sneak in there and they're not even going to know what we're doing. It's sort of like, you ever watch like the old James Bond movies where like the villain sort of like lays out every aspect of his plot while James Bond's sort of strapped to the gurney or whatever it is that he's, going to be done to. This is like Brandon Council's sort of version of that of, we're going to sneak in there and they're not going to know what hit them. We're going to get in there. We're going to quiet the crowd and get out. In fact, I feel so confident about this. I'm laying out every aspect of our plan right here before the game. Like, obviously, this is absurd. And I think what it directly points to is the lack of leadership that a coach like Brian Harsin has, the lack of control that a guy like this has over his program. Because really, in a lot of ways, this kind of reminds me of a lot of the empty, vapid, meaningless trash talk that's come out of like a Florida program in recent years. Whether it's Brenton Cox now or Chauncey Gardner years ago, there's this big, boastful talk that really in no way is connected to reality whatsoever, that guys don't feel, not only are they not afraid to say it now, they actually don't even feel any pressure to back it up. It's something they're almost sort of just doing for the sport, for the fun of it. And with Council saying this right here, it does kind of tie back to what the Georgia fans said to me on social media of, hey, this is exactly what the Auburn boosters probably want because they hate Harsin. They want him gone sooner rather than later. And this just becomes more evidence that this is a guy that doesn't have any real control over this program. His players really haven't quit on him yet. But you could see, I believe, a very high quit factor on Saturday in this game because the brightest fires burn out the quickest. Maybe they do think they're going to come in here and run the ball on Georgia on first and second down. And Auburn doesn't have bad running backs. Tank Bigsby's a guy that you know well. He's not the only one they have. Maybe they do feel like they're going to come in here early downs, early game, establish something on the ground, try to stay out of third down against Georgia. But the moment that proves incapable of happening, all of a sudden the quit that Auburn hasn't shown yet, maybe they do show now. I think it's worth considering for those of you trying to find out and figure out if you want to lay a big 30-point spread in a game like this, that this may be one of those places in which Auburn's looking for sort of a soft spot to land. We'll have to see about that. But what most of you are more interested in is what the Georgia response to all this ends up being. How does Georgia handle all of this? And I think you already know, and as it just so happens, Kirby Smart talked about that a little bit this week. There was a little bit of a dust-up at the beginning of the game last week between Georgia and Missouri. And, eyewitnesses who were on the scene there said maybe Georgia had a little bit of a hand in kind of how some of that got started, which is sort of out of character for Georgia, I think, overall, if that is indeed truly the way that all of that went down. But either way, Kirby Smart reiterated this week during one of his press conferences, unrelated to this because it hadn't happened yet, but Kirby Smart reiterated the mindset that he wants to see his team approach every game with when it comes to trash talk and big boasting and bragging and all that kind of stuff. No matter what you get from the other side, this is what Kirby Smart said on a similar topic earlier this week.
We play with our helmets, and we don't talk to the other team, and disappointed in any player that would talk to somebody on the other team, and we don't condone it. So something that we get to get fixed. And some teams you play do that more than others, and some teams are from the same line of thinking as yourself.
So listen, I think that's exactly what Kirby Smart has said. I remember the first time I heard him use that phrase of talk with your helmets. It does go back to that Florida game in 2017. Remember all the stuff that said there? But all Jake Fromm does is throw slant passes and, there's all kinds of stuff that got said. There have actually been a few instances over the course of the years where a Florida team that had no business saying anything to Georgia, talking any trash whatsoever to Georgia, ran their mouth, shot off their mouth before the beginning of the game, and obviously got embarrassed for having done so. There are other examples of that with other teams there too, where Georgia was just content, as Smart said there, to do talking with their helmets. And so that's going to be part of the game on Saturday where, hey, Georgia's going to have to be the more mature team. Pretty clearly, if a guy like Brandon Council's not if he's saying what he's saying, this is obviously an Auburn team right now that's pretty immature. This is obviously an Auburn team right now that's a little bit of a rudderless ship. They don't have quite the same level of leadership that would prevent these kinds of things from happening. So on Saturday, Georgia got a responsibility to be the more mature team. Did they do that on Saturday against Missouri? Maybe different people have, different opinions on that, but the responsibility exists on Saturday to be that. We're actually going to probably talk more about kind of the maturity aspect of Georgia maybe a little bit tomorrow. But there's another side of this coin where I think just flat out old school, man, Georgia just ought to embrace this. Georgia ought to use this as a chance to have the kind of emotional reboot you sort of need halfway through a season. Not special circumstances for Georgia because they're somehow in this unique category, but the season is a grind. You get tired. I mean, some of you that just travel from week to week to the games, you even get tired just doing that. To say nothing of the players who are practicing so hard each and every day, playing so hard each and every day, getting the best shot of every team you play because you are the reigning national champions. Not making an excuse. That's just kind of part of it. That for every team at this point in the year, when you kind of get moving from September into October after Saturday, you'll be halfway done with the regular season. There was a point in which, man, the grind just sort of gets to you. You have to kind of refocus and recenter your motivation. You have to sort of reboot the energy here a little bit. So use your home crowd on Saturday to do that. Use the fact that this, loudmouth from Auburn has shot off his mouth. And just old-fashioned roll up your sleeves, as we used to say in pro wrestling in the 80s, just get ready for a Pier 6 brawl and get ready to come out here and fight on Saturday. And I think that Georgia's actually ready to embrace that. I think that Georgia actually likes doing that kind of thing. And on Saturday, I think they embraced that. So for me, it's kind of two sides of the same coin, that Saturday's game provides Georgia an opportunity. On the one hand, it provides the opportunity to prove that you're more mature than what clearly Auburn's bringing to the table right now. And on the other hand, it's an invitation to a fight. And for a Georgia team that's been in kind of every kind of game you can be in thus far, a good old-fashioned fight against a hated rival, that sounds like a pretty good thing to do this weekend. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Meriwether and Tharp. I'm glad to have you with us, whether it's video. We start at 9:45 on our 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, the DawgNation app. 10 a.m. after that, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. We're available as a podcast, wherever you find them, the Apple Play, Spotify, all kinds of platforms for you to be on with us. We're just really happy to have you with us and a part of that here today. And, of course, big thanks to our friends at Meriwether and Tharp for making it all possible. Your source for Georgia divorce. And listen, divorce is a tricky topic. For some of you, it brings up bad memories. You've been through one. For others of you, it produces anxiety because you fear in the future you might be going through one. And it's one of those things where I'm sure you've probably tried to do everything you can to avoid that, because that's everyone's instinct, is to find a way to fix things before it gets to that point. But here's what we all know, that sometimes life just deals us a hand that's unpleasant. Sometimes life just deals us a hand that we wish was different than it actually is. And when that's your reality, the only choice is to confront that reality. And that means confronting it with a strong advocate by your side, because this is about the law. And it's about leveraging the law to your benefit, understanding the intricacies of the law, but also understanding the ways in which that certain things can be interpreted that could be to your advantage. Because the goal here is to set yourself up for a happier next season of life than the one you're currently in. And that's what our friends at Meriwether and Tharp can do for you. So I want you to reach out and find them online, theatlantadivorceteam.com, theatlantadivorceteam.com. When you do that, first thing you're going to see, a bunch of free resources that educate you enough to ask really good questions when you have that free initial consultation with one of their attorneys. And then after that, you can make the decision to hire Meriwether and Tharp to walk with you, hear your story, and put yourself together for a great tomorrow. That is what Meriwether and Tharp can do for you, or do for you. They are your source for Georgia divorce. So find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. All right, we're going to get Terence Edwards here in just a moment. Before that, though, I want to go around the doghouse, presented today by our friends at Serve Pro. And I want to talk about something here for a moment, a player that's been a hot topic, but also a really interesting piece of audio from Kirby Smart. And we all know this, that there are times in which Kirby Smart does not want to be with the media. And frankly, if he had his, choice, he may never want to do that. But there are clearly times he is asked questions he just doesn't want to answer. And, when it comes to like giving away strategy or things like that, I guess it's his prerogative to, be as forthcoming or not as forthcoming as he wants to be. But there are some moments in which Kirby really does kind of reveal some details, and he's a little bit more open than maybe sometimes you expect him to be. I sort of thought we got an example of this on Tuesday night when it comes to Darnell Washington. We've talked about Darnell on the show this week. I kind of got into the Darnell topic when I was on with Randy McMichael on, that's a great former Georgia tight end, on 92.9 The Game in Atlanta here this week. The thing I'm just sort of curious about is, I think that pretty clearly Darnell's having a good season. I think that pretty clearly Darnell is a big part of the story for Georgia. I don't think anybody could question that, just based on all the circumstantial evidence that Darnell Washington is a key cog for Georgia. And there are some fans who say, because he's so important for Georgia, I want to see him rewarded with more touches. Clearly, this is a guy that could have played a lot of different positions, and maybe over the course of his life as a football player, a lot of folks told him, well, maybe you should do this, maybe you should do this, and Darnell wanted to play the offensive position. He's a very big guy, could have been a $100 million offensive lineman or maybe a defensive end or something along those lines, but he wanted to be a tight end because he wanted to touch the football. And so there are a lot of Georgia fans who say, given the fact that Darnell has worked so hard, that he's such a great blocker, that he's such a pivotal part of this Georgia offense, given all those things being true, why not reward him with some more touches, specifically in the red zone, because Georgia needs to fix its red zone woes. This could create more touchdowns for him, which would just be kind of fun to see because people like Darnell Washington. And so Kirby Smart was asked this week, how come that doesn't happen more? And I thought that Smart actually went into some pretty good detail. Whether you're satisfied with the answer or not, you can't say that Smart doesn't answer the question. This is Kirby from earlier this week on what's going on with Darnell Washington, specifically around the red zone. Here's Kirby.
Yeah, we've called several plays in those situations for him, and some of them are based on the look, and some of them are based on the protection. There's plays built for a guy to be a red zone target. He certainly is that, but if you miss a protection or you miss a guy or they play a certain coverage, you got to go somewhere else. There's doubles on guys in the interior. There was one of the calls was to him on the play that Brock made against South Carolina, but the look they gave us dictated to go to Brock, and there's been several like that, but he's certainly a weapon that we have to use.
So listen, that's Kirby Smart, first of all, totally acknowledging the premise that everyone feels like they see. Hey, Darnell's a weapon. How do you use him? Smart says that's indeed the case. Smart also suggesting there are moments in which they've actually tried to get the ball to him. Maybe, as Kirby even said it, called the play for him, and yet you sort of read into that the context of Smart's answer there that, hey, maybe he's double teamed. Maybe there's just too many bodies right there around him. We've said that before. That's where the red zone gets tough, is because you shrink the field. There's less green grass. It's more bodies in a controlled area. And maybe being aware of the big target like Darnell Washington, almost like double teaming a guy down the low block when you're playing basketball, that almost becomes more of it, and that forces the ball to somewhere else. And as Kirby said in the South Carolina game, it becomes a great play for a guy like Brock Bowers. So that's a little bit of interesting insight into what's going on with Washington. And an acknowledgement from Smart. Apparently, they're going to keep trying to get the ball to him in that regard. So let's watch that. Let's watch it on Saturday. When Georgia gets down in the red zone, let's just keep our eyes on Washington and see what's happening around him. Is he being double-teamed? Are they running a bunch of bodies in his direction? Is he more open? Should you try to force the ball to him more because he does have the ability to win those one-on-one battles? I think that's a conversation that's all worth having, and I won't pretend to know the answers necessarily, but it's a source of curiosity. But you certainly hear Smart acknowledging the premise of, this is a guy we want to get the football to. But here's the other thing, though. I don't think any of us, even someone like me who legitimately would like to see a guy like Darnell get more touches, especially at a time in which the offense could use a boost, it seems like Washington's capable of doing it. Now, you hear me say all the time, Brock Bowers is the guy they need to be throwing it to the most, but that doesn't mean you can't also throw it to Darnell more. I believe they probably should. However, I don't think that any of us should get so fixated with that we lose sight of what a success story Darnell Washington is for Georgia right now. This is a guy that by almost anybody's estimation who's close enough to the program to have a respected opinion on this, Darnell had a tremendous offseason for Georgia, laser focused on being the very best player he can be for this football team. And he's really kind of emerging as not just a leader by example, but an actual vocal leader for this Georgia team. Last night after practice, yesterday evening, Darnell was one of the players that spoke to the media again. Darnell's done that a few times this year. This is a guy that previous to this year I think would be considered pretty soft-spoken, not really all that loud and vocal necessarily about Georgia football. That's the way I've experienced him. And yet, pretty clearly, he's been tabbed more than once to speak to reporters here this year. And he talked a little bit yesterday about his message to the team and his feeling about the team overcoming the adversity against Missouri to find a way to win that game closer than it should have been, yet Georgia still found a way to win. Y'all, let's don't lose sight of what Darnell is providing Georgia as we also spend some time trying to figure out how you get him more touches, because this is the story, I believe, of a leader emerging, and the people closest to the team are very well aware of this. This is Darnell from yesterday.
I mean, we're not quitters. Most teams, they get down 2 or 3 possessions, and they'll just be like, man, we lost, ain't no way. But, I look at the defensive guys in their eyes before they went out, took the field, made great stops and just held them to a field goal, held on 3 points. And I was just like, we got dogs.
Don't you love that? I mean, talking about his teammates, talking about his faith and his belief in them. In the same press conference, another point he kind of talked about being one of the guys that spoke up at halftime, challenging them. In a minute, we're going to talk to Terence Edwards, and Terence has told the story before of what John Stinchcomb did, Georgia-Auburn 2002, how that propelled Georgia. Sometimes it is that message from that player, like right there before you go back on the field, that makes all the difference in the world. Way heavier words that land with a much bigger punch than anything that a coach might say. Players have the chance to provide that. And all of a sudden, Darnell is one of the guys that's doing that. And yeah, I'd love to see him rewarded with more touches. I think maybe over the course of this season that might actually happen. But while that's in the process of taking place, notice the other process that's going on here. Georgia needs big-time leaders. And when you had so many key leaders off last year's team that are not here anymore, leaders emerging is a part of the story of this year. Y'all, it sounds like Darnell Washington right now is one of those. That's a really cool evolution for a player that we've always, all for the most part, been completely fascinated with. That aspect of his game really seems to be rounding into form. That is Around the Doghouse, and it is presented today by our friends at ServPro. And you've heard me talk about ServPro before, and a lot of you know we've actually used ServPro right here where I'm sitting right now. On the other side of the wall where I am is the office where we work, and this is what it looked like a few weeks ago, completely ravaged by some, I guess, broken water pipes, I guess what it was. Water was just running and flowing everywhere. Had the potential of ruining everything, but if you walk around there right now, I eat my lunch in this area every day, and meet with people every day, and it looks beautiful. It's right back to the way that it always was. It's exactly like ServPro said that it would be, put back together like it never even happened. All of those big pieces of equipment that are kind of, I guess, sort of getting the moisture out of the air and things like that, they're all gone now. Our workspace looks great, and it's simply thanks to ServPro. And they can do the same thing for you if you get your own water damage in your house or your business or your commercial property, whatever you might have, or if you have fire damage. That's a very serious thing there too. And yet so much of this can be restored and put back together, fixed, cleaned up. The restoration specialists at ServPro, that's what they're experts in. They can get it back for you like it never even happened. When you reach out and talk to someone from ServPro, just know you're also talking to someone who is a part of a franchise that's individually owned and operated, which means that when you do business with ServPro, you're doing business with folks that have a stake in the outcome just like you do. This isn't some, giant conglomerate that, doesn't know you're alive. No, these are people that want to serve you because serving you and doing right by you is what enables them to thrive as a business there as well. It's one of the reasons why I love recommending ServPro. So my invitation is to check them out online today, servpro.com. That's servpro.com, S-E-R-V, servpro.com. You can check them out for more on that. Speaking of Terence Edwards, we're going to check him out for more here in a minute too. Obviously a big part of our DawgNation postgame show, a guy who's been a good friend of ours here on DawgNation Daily for a long time. I'm going to ask him more about the Darnell Washington part of this, in addition to the leadership, which I do think that Darnell should be celebrated for. What about the mechanism by how you get the football to a guy like that? Let's talk to a guy that's been catching passes for a long time. Also, more on Georgia-Auburn, how you respond to the trash talk, how you get focused on Saturday's game. Let's just put it all on the table right now. It is a Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update with Terence Edwards right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let's say hello, Terence Edwards, Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update with him. And Terence, always appreciate your time and glad to have you as part of the show. And, there are just some things about football that I'll just admit I just don't know. And when it comes to the Darnell Washington thing, now we just celebrated him for his leadership, and I think that's a really important thing to do. I think that he's been incredibly valuable for Georgia, both on the field and also his presence in the locker room seems like that's becoming a pretty big factor here there as well. But there are a lot of Georgia fans who say, and I think this is a valid point, and Kirby Smart also seems to agree with this too, that because he is working so hard, because he is doing so much, because Georgia could use as much of an offensive spark as you can possibly get, you got to feed him the football a little bit more. So, Terence, what is the process like of that where it seems like, there's about a 2 or 3 catch ceiling for him? He's a different kind of player. What is the process by which you would, if you chose to, just get the ball to a guy like Darnell Washington more frequently? How would that happen?
It's just up to the offensive coordinator. It's up to the game plan process of trying to figure out ways to best fit his skill set and just being able to put him in position to throw him the ball more. We all know and believe that Brock Bowers is the number one guy offensively. He's the best player, probably the best player in the country. But you scheme and find ways to get him the football, and deservedly so. you can also do the exact same thing to Darnell. Darnell is a mixed match in a different way than Brock. Brock is just ultra fast and just bigger, faster, and stronger than the guys that he's going against. Darnell is just bigger and just more talented than everyone he's going against. And he has natural hands. He catches everything that comes his way. It's just up to the offensive coordinator and the offensive staff to put more emphasis on trying to single him out and find ways to get him the football. I wish I could sit here and say what's the magical, potion to do it. It's just, okay, we want to get Darnell the ball. Let's find ways to get him the ball because he deserves more, because he's doing all the little things that allows him to. I mean, he's happy. You can see how joyful he is doing the little things. But he also wants to be able to catch footballs because he's a tight end. So he wants to be implemented in the game plan as well.
So I have a theory about this, and I'll admit that there's a chance I'm just wrong about this because, as I said before, you're a guy that caught passes for a living. I'm just a guy that watches this stuff on TV. But I have a theory that Darnell doesn't look open sometimes during a game because he's not going to run past people. And this is not on sets a minute. I think this would be true for any quarterback, that when you see a defender blanketed on Washington, I think it can be easy to think, oh, maybe I want to go somewhere else with the throw right here because there may be another player that's more capable of creating a little bit of daylight between himself and his defender, where Washington's ability is, I keep comparing it to basketball. He just posts you up and he just wins that battle with his sheer physicality, but maybe he doesn't look open during the play because he's not going to run past whoever might be covering him, because that's just not really what his skill set is. He's a good athlete, but his athleticism sort of shows up in a little bit different way. Do you think there's anything to that, or am I, completely off base by suggesting that?
You're not off base, but there's a lot of times in plays there's where the ball just is not going. There's decoys, there's guys that are just spot holders to take defenders away from other receivers coming into a certain spot. So just not looking at the all 22 or knowing the actual play call and not knowing where Stetson reads take him, it's hard to just say. But he is a type of player that he's not open, but he's open. He's just so much bigger than everyone. You just look at the catches that he made in the Missouri game, and you just give that guy opportunity. He can shield away defenders, and if the ball is not placed well, he can be turned to a defender himself, and it not turns into a turnover. We just have to put more emphasis on getting him the ball in spots that he's very comfortable. Over the middle, if we throw the ball through the middle, he's the guy that can control the middle of the football field. When you have split safeties or one safety, just give him an opportunity. I just think he just needs more opportunity to showcase his skill set, because we all believe that's why we're talking about it. He is a skill set that we need to use.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And here's the other thing that kind of comes up sometimes too, where it seems like we get different, phrasings on this sometimes depending on what kind of benefits you in the moment. Like sometimes when you ask, hey, why isn't so-and-so getting the football more? The answer is sort of this blanket idea of, you just sort of have to take what the defense gives you. As in, there's no play ever called for any one player. You just sort of have to take what the defense gives you. But what Kirby Smart said in the clip that we played before you joined us was, Smart saying about his team, we have called some plays down there for Darnell, and yet the coverage or the circumstances dictated going somewhere else. So I guess let me try to get in the weeds on this for a moment. Like, how often is a play called for a player? Once again, to use the basketball analogy, we've all seen the coach with the white, the dry erase whiteboard on the sideline drawing up the play to get the ball to LeBron during a timeout. Like, how much does that happen in football where down at the 9-yard line you say, hey, we want this ball to go to Darnell, we want this ball to go to Brock Bowers, we want this ball to go to Kenny McIntosh? How often in a football game is a team like Georgia drawing up a play for a dude?
Well, I'm pretty sure, because I believe in Todd Monken and the offensive staff that they're doing their due diligence during the week to understand and kind of prognosticate what type of defense that they're going to get. And with that being said, the only play in football that I can think of right now that where the ball is going to go to him, doesn't matter the coverage, is a screen play. Yeah. It is going to go. So if there's a play call for Darnell and it's not the defense that the coaches are assuming it's going to be, you just can't throw the ball because it's just not there. We're just going to throw it to him because the play is called for him, and it's a turnover. Then we're going to still be killing Stetson or whoever in the end of the day. Yeah. Oh, he threw it to Darnell, that's where the ball's supposed to go, but it was an interception. Then we're going to be killing the quarterback.
Sure.
So, playing quarterback, you have to, it's an old cliche. If wherever the defense dictates, that's where the ball should go. I've had plenty of plays called for me and the ball not come our way because the defense that we thought they would run in this certain part of the field, they didn't. They did something. They scout and they game plan as well. So I believe Kirby when he says that there's been plays called because he's a weapon and he should have those opportunities. Now we just got to figure out ways to get him the ball, even if the defense gives you another look, that the ball still can go there. Screen pass. He's big. He's strong. Let's throw some screens to him inside the 5-yard line.
No, I think that's really interesting. I guess the final point for me on this is, and I think you and I have talked about this even the post-game show on Saturday, that while I'd love to see Darnell get more touches, in this same kind of conversation, the guy that I think desperately needs more in this Georgia offense, especially if it's kind of scuffling the way that it was on Saturday, is a guy like Brock Bowers. Like, I want to see Washington get more, but I don't want that to come at the expense of the other tight end. In a lot of ways, I'd like to see both these tight ends more heavily involved in the offense, but when you're not moving the chains, Bowers is the guy that you just got to lean on and be able to get that done for you.
Oh, most definitely. When you're the best player, you're counting on to make those plays, and 9 times out of 10, Brock is going to make those plays when given that opportunity. So, with the guy that was the number one receiver when I played, you expect to get a certain amount of targets, and coaches, players, teammates expect you to make those plays, and he's lived up to that billing. So, as the number one guy, hopefully A.D. Mitchell comes back to take some of that pressure off as well because he deserves a certain amount of opportunity because his talent dictates that. But Brock also should be, he should be getting, I'm not saying he should get the Cooper Kupp treatment when he gets 19 passes thrown your way in a game. That's crazy. But he should be the focal point of the passing game. That just his skill set and his play dictates that.
Taking you back 2002 for a moment, you played in the Man Enough game when former Auburn coach, Georgia graduate Pat Dye had gone on, I guess, with the Feinbaum show, early iteration of the Feinbaum show, and said that Georgia wasn't man enough to beat Alabama. Now, in future years, he said that he did this to help Georgia, although it certainly wasn't, treated that way at the time, and no one ever really knows what the truth was about that. Obviously, Pat Dye no longer with us, but what was it like that week? Because it's not quite the same situation here this week, but there is the chance for bulletin board material. There's the chance for extra motivation. The Auburn player kind of popping off yesterday about his belief that Auburn could dominate Georgia on early downs, running the football. What do you remember about having, somebody, media obviously very different back then, but about having somebody challenge your team's manhood before a game like that against Alabama? What do you remember about that?
Oh, I remember it like it was yesterday. That's definitely something that was posted inside the butt smear. That was something that was spoke about frequently throughout that whole week. So going into that game, it was definitely a shot in our manhood that we are not man enough to go into Bryant-Denny Stadium and win. Like we don't have good players. We're not man enough. So it did take a shot, and it was a extra motivation to go in there and to prove everyone that statement was wrong, and that's what we did.
And so for Georgia on this Saturday, I mean, things are different now. I guess maybe they're not that that much different. How do you think Georgia probably uses this, if at all? I mean, we're coming towards the end of the week where you're kind of sort of ramping down with practice here a little bit. But how much do you think that Georgia will try to use this, or maybe do you think that Georgia kind of needs the opposite of that? They need a little bit more, I guess, poise and maturity, and maybe not, quite so fired up. Like how much of a weapon do you think something like this could be, for Georgia on Saturday?
Oh, it's definitely going to be a weapon. Most definitely when, offensive line come out and just say, especially to a certain group, that we could dominate them and we just got to keep them out of their sub packages. That's Coach Scott is going to talk about that. He's definitely going to use this to get to his players, and he's going to test your manhood and say that you're not man enough, use that phrase again, to beat them one-on-one or to destroy their running game. This player actually said he believes he's a better player, he's a better man than you. So it's definitely going to be used. I mean, that's why you go and try not to say anything in the media times. So this is motivation. This is something that's going to be talked about throughout the whole defense, especially. And I'm sure Kirby and company is going to use this throughout the team meetings as well.
It is Terence Edwards here at Marlowe's Tavern, Insider Update with him. Now, listen, you can't be our Georgia football insider. That's what Terence Edwards is. But with Marlowe's Tavern, you can be an insider there. And listen, that's the next best thing because you get so many great features and benefits for doing that. And joining is just really, really easy. You can download the Marlowe's app to register. And when you do, as an incentive, it's like your own NIL deal in a lot of ways. You're going to get $10 off $30 at Marlowe's Tavern just for signing up. Then after that, here's how the Insider Club is going to work for you. You can dine at any Marlowe's Tavern, including the one right there in your neighborhood. When you spend at least $15 on food and beverage, that's going to earn what they call a qualified visit. Now, once you get 4 qualified visits, you'll receive a complimentary entree reward up to $20 to be used on your next visit there as well. You can redeem those at any Marlowe's Tavern. You also get special offers on your birthday there as well. So it's a great time to become a Marlowe's Tavern insider. Just download the Marlowe's Tavern app to get started on that, and you'll enjoy great stuff. Terence, I'm always reminded of the value that I think you and your career put on the Georgia-Auburn game. This was a series really important to you. You've told great stories about like what John Stinchcomb did halftime of 2002, a game that propelled your team to the first ever SEC East division win in the history of the program. When you think about Georgia getting ready to play a game like this on Saturday, how much does this rivalry still matter to you, and how much do you think and hope it matters to these Georgia fans who are in the stands, players on the field, a chance to go out and once again participate in the Deep South's oldest rivalry?
I think it's still a legitimate rivalry, even though we have dominated this rivalry. I know that both fan bases don't really care about the records, don't really care about what's going on. You have to win this game. This game is big just for the South, even though it's the oldest rivalry in the South. Auburn has so many Georgia players on it. I mean, that is someone that I say we have to beat. I think we will beat them, but you can't go in there and take Auburn lightly. I know they got a lot going on over there with the coaches' rumors, coaches on the hot seat, but he's going to have his team ready to play, and everyone knows that this rivalry here is the oldest in the South, and for Georgia, it is another stepping stone to our goals. That's winning the SEC East, and this game matters a lot to a lot of people.
So I'll finish with this then. Keeping in mind the fact that, hey, we haven't seen Georgia play great the last couple of weeks. They were on the road last week. Keep in mind, kind of everything that's going on. What do you want to see from Georgia here this week in particular? What's, a couple of things that you say, hey, this is the message that Georgia needed to send. This is a reminder that the version of the Dogs we saw beating up on Oregon and beating up on South Carolina, that was the real Georgia. What could Georgia do for you this week that would make you, I guess, feel that way again?
I just want to go in and play a clean football game. I don't think we've played a clean football game the last 2 weeks. That's offensively and defensively. I think special teams, besides lad fumbles, have played fairly well. The kicking game have been outstanding. But just offense and defense, I just don't want to see kind of the bonehead mistakes, the drop passes. I know that's going to happen, but just the non-contested drop passes. I don't want to see on a scramble drill the DB just lose his man and we get a big play. Just those little things. So play your keys. And just go and play your best football. It's not ever going to be perfect, but we just got to play more consistently than we have the last 2 weeks.
I tell you, Terence, I love your insight into Georgia football. I appreciate you sharing that with us today as a part of a Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update. Also looking forward to seeing you on Saturday at the DawgNation post-game show, a part of that there as well. You'll join us, for your commentary after the game there, too. That's always a lot of fun. So, Terence, thank you so much for your time. I look forward to seeing you on Saturday after the game.
And even before I go, B.A., I know this is not Georgia Bulldog related, but I would like all the Bulldog Nation, because it is in our backyard, to send prayers up to Elijah DeWitt, the receiver from Jefferson County, that tragically lost his life yesterday. Like, we all, that is a sad young man. I don't know him personally, but I've watched his film from afar. Very good football player. We just need to send prayers up to his family, condolences to his family, and just pray for these young men that's out in this world today.
Terence, I appreciate you saying that, and obviously I know how close this sport is to your heart. Young men who, play, especially that position that DeWitt was doing such a great job at the wide receiver spot. So, yeah, our state's hurting today because of that. So I appreciate you saying that, Terence. Thank you so much.
No problem. See See you Saturday.
All right, good stuff from Terence. Let's hold off on the SEC through music because I was going to mention this before the show was done, and Terence saying this, I think it's a good time to go ahead and mention it now. Elijah DeWitt was a very, very good wide receiver for Jefferson, a guy that was having a tremendous year, and just an incredibly sad story. Was shot. I guess it may have been 2 nights ago, if I have the timeline correct on this. I just became aware of this morning. I think it's only kind of just now becoming something that people are aware of, and I may have the timeline on this slightly wrong, and I think details on this are still emerging. The only thing we know is, or at least that I currently know, is where it happened. It happened in the, if you're familiar with the Sugarloaf Mills area, it happened in the parking lot there. And there's going to be more news that comes about this. But this is a young man in the game that we had earlier this year between Oconee County and Jefferson. He had an amazing game. He was having a very good season. He's a really good player, and I know that he'd already generated some college interest. There was even some thought that he was, getting a look from an SEC team or two because of how he was performing here right now. So this is as sad and tragic as it gets. I don't really have a lot in the way of details other than the fact that it has happened. And so I'm just shaken by this morning, just so shaken by this, just because this is a guy we saw on TV, on Peachtree TV a few weeks ago. I know Rusty Mansell, my partner there, has talked about it a little bit on social media already. So this is tough, man. This is really, really hard. And obviously, Terence loves the sport, loves the high school level. So this is incredibly sad. So I'm glad that Terence brought that up. And it's never easy to get back into the show after something like this, but we are obviously going to acknowledge what's happening in real life there. So truly, sincerely praying for everyone around that Jefferson football program and everybody who knew Elijah here. This is not an easy thing at all. So our prayers there, and I guess with that we'll do our best try to move on now with the rest of the show.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Really fun to have Terence Edwards talking Georgia football, and we always appreciate his insight into all of that. And, I am really looking forward to the game between Georgia and Auburn on Saturday. I like rivalry games, and I do like the fact that rivalry games still really matter. And, I think one of the things that if you don't travel a lot of the games, you don't have a full appreciation for just how close Auburn is to the University of Georgia, how close it is to the Atlanta area where I live. You can get a car, you can be at Jordan Hare Stadium an hour and a half. I mean, it's almost as easy to drive to Auburn as it is to drive to Athens almost. I mean, and it is that familiarity that's bred such an intensity in this rivalry, because when Auburn's been at its best, it's had a lot of players from Georgia. And really one of the reasons why, Auburn has kind of regress as a program, part of that is they don't quite have the same cachet in state that they used to. And so, that's where the history of this rivalry, I mean, obviously the history predates all of us, Deep South's oldest rivalry, but when it's been intense in our lifetime, that's why it's been intense. Georgians playing for Auburn, or in a lot of cases it's that sort of, contested territory down that Columbus area where Georgia's certainly won its fair share of players in that Columbus area. In recent years, that used to be a Auburn hotbed with Del McGee at Georgia. That's not been the case. And that just creates a great atmosphere around the rivalry game. I don't care that Georgia is a 30-point favorite. I think it's going to be an intense scene on Saturday because people still know this. They still appreciate this. They know how valuable all of that is. And in a roundabout way, I guess I'm sort of glad that Brandon Council, the Auburn offensive lineman, has said what he said, because anything that throws another log on this rivalry fire is certainly good for me. Now, we'll get more around the rest of the SEC here in a moment. But before that, let me remind you, as we go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean, that this is the time right now to get your cruise travel locked and loaded for the end of 2022, heading to early 2023. I'm double dipping. I got a cruise at the end of this year. I got one early next year. Already talking about maybe another cruise to add to the list there for me over the course of the next year and a half or so. But the big one comes up in April 24th and 28th. Just got a lot of details handed to me via email about my cruise falling into place for that, and we want you to be a part of that too. Our friend Jessica Slater is a travel agent specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean to book the second ever cruise with DawgNation. Royal Caribbean values its relationship with DawgNation, so they want the very best travel agents helping folks get locked in and ready to go on this. We're leaving out of Port Canaveral on Independence of the Seas. We're going to Nassau in the Bahamas. We're going to Perfect Day, Coco Cay, that beautiful private island oasis right there in the Bahamas. We want you with us for it. So Jessica Slater, you can call her 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. Or you can visit a website that she has made called RoyalDogs.com to get all the information you need. That's RoyalDogs.com for more on the Dog Nation cruise coming up this April that we want you to be a part of. All right, so let us now kind of dive in to our cruise around the SEC with Royal Caribbean topics here. And tomorrow we're going to get very heavy into official picks for all the big games. A lot of those in the SEC. I'm not going to be able to be on Go With The Flow this week. That was recorded yesterday. I had to step away from work for just a little while, so I won't be making. I have my picks, but I don't really have my reasoning behind my picks. So I'm going to do a lot of that with y'all tomorrow during the show, which I'm looking forward to being able to do. But I wanted to spend a minute on a game that we're not picking officially tomorrow and would not rise to the level of being an official pick for me, but I am a little curious about this. So Missouri, fresh off playing better at home against Georgia than folks expected it to, going on the road to Florida on Saturday. Now, here's one of the things I think we've learned about Missouri. I do think their defense is legitimately good. Like, you kind of wonder, what about the Georgia game was real? What about the Georgia game has any kind of staying power whatsoever? I think that Missouri, especially up front, is capable of doing some things defensively. They're going to give fits to almost anybody they're playing, whether it be Georgia, whether it be anybody else. I think that Missouri is going to be capable of generating some success defensively. But for a lot of Georgia fans who kind of wonder, okay, well, is the team that just played my team close, can they go out there and do even better against the Florida team that almost anyone would say, by comparison's worse than Georgia is? I sort of don't quite expect that to happen. You know, we talked about, kind of the emotions of a season a little earlier. Think about what Missouri's been through these last couple of weeks. So they played really hard against Georgia, but ultimately they didn't win. And the week before that, they had their shot against Missouri, and the kicker who had been a hero against the Dogs sort of let them down that spot on the road against Auburn. And so all of a sudden now, this kind of stuff starts to add up here a little bit, where emotionally you kind of wonder what kind of state of mind they're going to be in being away from Faurot Field on Saturday, down there in Gainesville. So I think this becomes a little bit of a game to maybe see what Florida's all about here, and maybe a Missouri team that just has a hard time matching the emotion of last week. I think that Florida-Missouri is a little bit of a fascinating game. It's not one that I probably expect Missouri to play quite as well in as they did the last time. That's not an official pick for me on the side of Florida. But it's at least, I think, worth considering, and the possibility that maybe Missouri might find some of the emotional last 2 weeks catching up with them a little bit there as they head down to take on Florida. Speaking of another SEC game of note, also not one of the bigger games, but a game worth your attention there too. What's going on with Will Levis, the Kentucky quarterback, as South Carolina gets ready to come into Lexington? Matt Jones putting out there on Twitter, he says a lot of speculation online, but here's what's real. Will Levis is questionable for the game on Saturday. Matt obviously knows the Kentucky situation pretty closely. He says he has an injury different than the finger that isn't long-term serious but could leave him out. He's going to be a game-time decision there. Now, you know that Levis had the weird thing where the finger got bent, and you saw that. It was kind of a grotesque photo, but a lot of folks saw that. So Jones, who knows the situation around Kentucky, says that Will Levis is questionable here for the game against South Carolina. We did see Chris Rodriguez return at running back for Kentucky last week, so maybe this is a game, being at home, that Kentucky can kind of lean on its running game a bit here against South Carolina. I'm not nearly as impressed with Will Levis as somebody somewhere always seems to be. I'm never quite identifying who it is that's so into Will Levis, but I don't know that the absence of Levis makes a huge deal for Kentucky playing at home against South Carolina. But there's also that lingering curiosity about one of these road games that Georgia has to play, Kentucky being one of them, Mississippi State being another. I'll have more thoughts on the MSU hosting Arkansas tomorrow, but this is a chance for Kentucky, maybe without its starting quarterback, as Matt Jones suggests, to demonstrate what they're capable of doing at home against South Carolina team that we've seen already, including against Georgia, not look particularly great a couple of times this year. So a little bit of interest there on Kentucky for that. And then finally, I'll just finish with this because I've kind of gone a little long here. It is amazing how much criticism that Jimbo Fisher's starting to generate here. And going into the game against Alabama on Saturday, you've seen, Paul Feinbaum talk about the possibility he could be fired sometime within the next year or two. You've seen Reese Davis kind of weighing in on a similar topic about, the need to do better here. Just lots of different voices are kind of having their turn with, what is going on with Jimbo Fisher. That's one of the reasons why I think this Alabama game comes at the wrong time for him. I think Alabama is motivated for a couple of different reasons, even if they don't have their starting quarterback. And here's what the issue seems to be stemming from with Jimbo. In a lot of ways, it kind of reminds me of kind of the end of the Gus Malzahn era at Auburn, where eventually folks decided, okay, well, if you're going to be the coach, you just can't have your offense anymore. Well, at that point, Malzahn had never really proven himself to be a CEO-style head coach. His reason for being hired as coach at Auburn in the first place was because he'd been the team that had won the national championship in 2010. He'd been the offensive coordinator, that you hired him for his offensive system. And if you don't want the offensive system of Gus Malzahn, well, do you really want Gus Malzahn? And eventually Auburn folks decided, no, the answer is no, we don't. It's a similar thing with Jimbo Fisher here. The A&M offense, the thing that he brought, is really what's failing them right now. And listen, I say this as a guy that's really supported Jimbo, that believed he was a better coach, that thought he got kind of a raw deal at Florida State. And a lot of what I have been saying has the appearance of eventually being proven wrong. And if that's the case, I'll take the L. I got no problem taking my medicine when I get something wrong. In the case of Jimbo Fisher, I may eventually really get this wrong, and I'll be more than happy to wear the L when I do. But let's talk for a moment about why it appears to be wrong right now. And some of this just seems to be related to the kind of offense that Jimbo wants to run. They play as slow as anybody. They're generating no offense whatsoever. That if Jimbo stays on, that he may have to bring somebody else in to run a different kind of offense. Well, at that point, you're kind of divorcing Jimbo from the reason that you hired him. And so do you still want him as your head coach if you no longer want Jimbo Fisher's offense? It's going to be really fascinating here over the course of the next few weeks to see just how much of this Jimbo can hold together. Because if you want to go back to a few months ago, it looked like they were really building something up. They had gotten the number one recruiting class. And in the playoff era, no program that's produced a number one recruiting class has failed to eventually win a national championship. And so a lot of folks assume that must be the trajectory that A&M's eventually on there as well, even if they haven't won many games, on the field. That must be the trajectory that they're on. All of a sudden now, all of that's really called into question, and you're left to wonder what is next for a program that's really struggling. Well, whatever next is probably begins after the Alabama game, because I haven't heard anybody yet that has liked A&M's chances of keeping this really close at all. It is a one-way street on the side of the Crimson Tide for Saturday, and we'll have more on that tomorrow. But as for now, tough times for Jimbo, getting a lot of criticism. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And one of the things you've heard me talk about is how much I value the Georgia-Auburn rivalry. I love celebrating this. I like the history and tradition of college football, and when it comes to our version of college football, Georgia-Auburn is as big a part of that as anything. And one of the new traditions that's been kind of added to this in recent years, which I think is really fun, is in concert with what the UGA Alumni Association does, kind of creating a competition with the folks over at Auburn, their alumni association there as well. They call it Beat Week, and it's a chance for each of these two alumni associations to try to beat out the other in terms of generating donations during this particular week, heading to the Auburn game there on Saturday. So this is what I think is a great thing. So Georgia's going for its third consecutive win. They've won in each of the last 2 years. Can win that again by getting your donations in before Saturday and getting involved and being a big part of this. So when you donate, you get Georgia a step closer to beating Auburn again. You beat them on the field on Saturday. You beat them when it comes to the donations to the university there as well. And, of course, you already know the great stuff, that money you donate to the UGA Alumni Association, what it does. Not only does it create a great organization that connects dogs together no matter where they may live in our country, in our world, wherever else, but it also goes to support the university that we all love, the university that educated you, the university that's providing research that's potentially changing the lives for the better of thousands, if not millions of people across our state, our country, and our world, that UGA increasingly is becoming kind of a real beacon that everybody kind of looks to as a leader at the forefront of the best kind of change in our country and in our world. And you can support that yourself by getting involved with the UGA Alumni Association. And this week, you can kind of beat Auburn in the process, which is all a really good thing. So donate today to the UGA Alumni Association, and you can be a part of that. So make sure you check that out. And we're, of course, glad to have our friends from the UGA Alumni Association with us here on DawgNation Daily today. All right, so we'll get ready to wrap things up with a golden shoe here. Talk about a great-looking graphic. This is a golden shoe selected just for how nice the graphic is. One of the things I always love is the what's that coming down the track. And I'm a big believer that it is what's that coming down the track and not who's that coming down the track. Although in this case, Houston Evans goes the other way, but we're going to count that nonetheless because it's a beautiful graphic. But I'm a big believer it's what's that coming down the track, not who's that coming down the track. But anyway, I just love that whole deal. And Houston Evans creates this. It's the glory train. It says who's that coming down the track. You got the train, you got the Georgia G in the front, you got Uga standing on top there on that. It's an incredible graphic by Houston Evans, really well done, and certainly a great thing to kind of give out when it comes to a golden shoe here today. How about our Gator Hater Updater there as well? More than 5,000 days since those lousy, stinking Gators have won a national championship. We bask in the glory of their ineptitude around here. And we also believe that 23 days from right now, Dogs back in Jacksonville, beating up on Florida again. Cannot wait for that. But first, there is rivalry action to take care of this Saturday against Auburn. So we got time to think about two things at once. So we'll think about Auburn this Saturday and Florida coming up 23 days from right now. We'll see you tomorrow here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. And on video, you saw the QR code there a moment ago. You can step in there and get your Lousy Stinking Gators t-shirt. I'll show this to you again. I don't keep it on the desk during the show because I think it makes for a little bit of a sloppy look. But nonetheless, if you want the Lousy Stinking Gators t-shirt, I think this is awesome. This is really, really a fantastic piece of apparel here. And nothing better than showing those Lousy Stinking Gators just how lousy and stinking they really are. This t-shirt gives you a chance to do that. So make sure you do that today. QR code right there. You can use that. Or you can just go to the top of the page of DawgNation.com and access that there too. So some really, really great, easy ways to get a great-looking t-shirt, and you can be a part of that today with the Lousy Stinking Gators t-shirt. All right, so yesterday we did not have time for a ton of comments, and I promised you more of those today. So we shall do that today and get kind of going here on a bunch of really fun, really good stuff. So on YouTube first, we'll do Facebook, we'll do DawgNation.com, and we'll just have it all going. Good to see Dimitri Sullivan in the comment section. I thought Dimitri made a good point a little earlier, and I tried to respond to him during the show about, I do think that NFL quarterbacks, I think across the board, you see NFL teams throwing the ball to tight ends more than a lot of college teams do. And I think part of that is they're just really, really comfortable throwing the ball to tight windows. They wouldn't be NFL quarterbacks if they weren't. So I thought Dimitri made a good point about that. Jonathan Aaron taking the jab here at Urban Meyer. Yeah, Urban's not a popular dude. There's no question about that. And his, I think, reputation's been pretty forever tarnished by some of the stuff that he's been involved with. I think that's probably fair. Matt Presley says, I can't wait to see the energy the Dogs show up with this weekend. A lot of disrespect and doubt being casted. Yeah, there's this like feeling that I crave, and some of y'all know what this is, and this is why I personally like attending the games. It not only makes my job easier, you cover the game. It's easier to cover the game from the location of the game. But in addition to that, as a fan, I've always, especially if money were not an object, which obviously money is an object for all of us, but all things being equal, my preference is to be in the stadium because there's this feeling you get. There's this big game vibe that transcends normal emotion. And I just love it. And you don't get it but a few times a year. And it just feels so good to have every person's energy sort of marshaled all in the same direction towards the same goal. And on Saturday, I believe that's going to be totally annihilating Auburn. And I just love it. I just love it. And it's just not possible to sort of live at that sort of apex version of energy at all times. It's not possible to do that. But it is possible to kind of conjure it up a couple times during the year. And frankly, that's one of the reasons why I'm so sympathetic to Georgia fans who are like, Newton starts, things like that. Because it's not nearly as easy to do that at noon. Now, last year, Georgia did do that against Arkansas, but it took a bunch of work to get people thinking that way. That's not the kind of thing that comes naturally. But there's something about, and we're going to see this on Saturday, the way in which Sanford Stadium sort of feels on that kind of fall day as you sort of head towards that late afternoon. And y'all, there's a reason why that bridge side, the west end zone side of Sanford Stadium has always been open, because you can look out there and you can see how beautiful it looks. And like the vibe around Athens kind of creates part of what you feel, in the stadium. And I just love it. I live for that kind of thing. I think it's going to be present on Saturday. I'm really, really calling on fans to make this a huge, huge atmosphere on Saturday. We're going to talk a lot about this tomorrow to close out the week. Make this stadium a house of horrors for Auburn on Saturday because of what Brandon Council said or just because you want to. Whatever your reasoning is, it just needs to get done. I believe it will, and I think you're right about that. I just can't wait for it. Cannot wait for it. Noah Sheldon's calling it 55-7 Dogs. Foster Moss calling it 59-0. So you love to see that. You love to see that. Jerry Dogfan says, do you think the defensive line will be fired up on Saturday? I'd love to see 4, maybe 5 sacks. Yeah, I'd love to see that there as well. Now, if you get a huge sack total, I also think you're bringing, I think you got to get your edge rushers going here a little bit. I don't think the edge rusher story, the Robert Beal, the Nolan Smith, I don't think the edge rusher story has been as profound for Georgia yet as it should. But I do expect a big game for the Georgia defensive line. I do believe they're going to have this, Doofus's words stuffed in their face over and over again. Now, Kirby Smart's not going to do it. It's a little bit like, and we've had people kind of tell us before kind of how the process for all this works. Kirby Smart is like the dignified leader of the organization. Now, sometimes he's, sometimes he's doing plenty of screaming and yelling. But when it comes to something like this, he's going to pretend that he's not even aware of it. And yet, whether it be Scott Sinclair or, maybe you deputize Scott Cochran into duty for this or whoever, they will be more than happy to kind of remind these Georgia players about what was said. And listen, here's the thing. I don't believe any statement like this is a game changer, right? I don't think it makes Georgia play wildly better than otherwise would. But as I mentioned a little earlier, in a long season, you'll take everything you can get. Any little thing that you can use to your advantage, of course you use it. Because if it makes you 1% better, how good is Georgia if they're 1% better? For a team that's already a formidable foe, what if you gave them even 1% more to, kind of get ready and be even more focused? So you use everything you can. I do believe they'll use this. I think the Georgia defensive line is going to feel the brunt of all of that. The Biscuit says, I believe Vegas is usually and eventually right. Well, here's what I'll believe about that Biscuit there as well. They're not pulling these numbers out of nowhere. They're not. And the thing that kind of aggravates me to death is, well, all they do is set the lines and they'll get even money on both sides. Vegas never has even money on both sides of the game. It never happens. You can't do that. Here's what Vegas does. They set the lines so that they don't get punished by a big bet on a bad line. That's what sports books do when it comes to gambling. The reason why is, I don't have the numbers exactly right on this, but it's something along the lines of, if you look at what slot machines make, the casino industry in most places like in New Jersey or Nevada, that's about $1 billion business. Slot machines are big business. By comparison, sports betting is actually much smaller. The entire legally wagered handle in even a big state like a New Jersey where there's a lot of money bet on sports. Nevada, there's actually less money bet on sports in Nevada than there is in New Jersey, even though it's been around for longer. You're still for the most part talking about like I said, I may not have the number exactly right, but it's something in the neighborhood of $100 million, something like that, maybe a little less than $100 million. Whereas the slot machine business is probably about 10 times of that. So what sports betting is about in a lot of ways for the people who run the industry, it's about protecting profits. You don't want to lose big money on bad bets, or I should say big bets on bad lines. And so they have to set the line to keep sharp players away. And that's really what the nature of the business is about. And that's why, as the Biscuits said, over the course of the long haul, a lot of the things that are happening in sports will kind of gravitate back towards what the Vegas line set them as. I would say, generally speaking, that's kind of true. And that's one of the reasons why I find that kind of stuff so fascinating, because if you look at it from the right lens, it can be at least potentially predictive. It can be. Let's see what else. Jerry Dogfan says, if you bet it at 24 and it moves to 30, are you locked in at 24? Yeah, you're locked in on the bet that you make. And that's one of the fun things that a lot of college football obsessives do is when the rest of the world is focused on the NFL, the college lines for the upcoming week come out. And a lot of times these lines are way different on Sunday than they will eventually be by the time that the average fan sort of paying attention to them. And In some cases, like I know DraftKings does this, people like that, they actually have kind of like, in some cases, lines up 2 weeks in advance, or and in some cases, you also go all the way back to the summer too. But you do see great change with that. Like one of the games I really like this week is I like Arkansas. I think they're getting right now, the last check I saw, about 8 points against Mississippi State. But a couple of weeks ago, that was Mississippi State as a 3-point favorite. All of a sudden, now they're an 8-point favorite. That's an example of a line really changing. And in my belief, I think that line's changed too much. I'm not devaluing Arkansas too much because of the last 3 weeks. Some people, I guess, maybe are, and that's kind of where the difference in opinion kind of comes in. But if you really ever wanted to get serious about putting down bets in a game or something like that, understanding where you get the line and kind of how the line is moving is one of the most important things to understand. Stick D says, what area of weakness do you see in which Georgia can exploit, dominate Auburn for the win? I don't think Auburn's very good at quarterback right now. I think that it was obvious to me, and listen, I actually kind of like Robbie Ashford, but I don't think that this is not what Auburn was built to be. Auburn brought Zach Calzada in to win the job. And when Calzada was incapable of doing that, that became an automatic indicator that Auburn was going to be terrible because this was their plan. No disrespect to Robbie Ashford, but Ashford was not their plan. TJ Finley was not really their plan. Zach Calzada was their plan. And what I've been told is at no point in time did Calzada really rise up and overtake really even either one of those guys. That actually Finley and Ashford both probably had better summers than Calzada did. So this was kind of a failed organization from the outset of the season. They wanted Calzada to be their dude, and he was incapable of doing that. And ever since then, Auburn's been just kind of doomed. So that's like the one area in which I think that you can most lean on Auburn. They just don't have the quarterback that's likely to step in and beat you. They just don't have that. David Johnson says you also got to stop the tank on Saturday. No doubt that's, kind of what their strength has been, running the football for sure. Barry Watkins, who I quoted earlier in the show today, also checking in here today too. I thought what Barry sent to me on Twitter yesterday was hilarious about the Auburn boosters paying him to say that. That's very funny. Very funny. Chris Free says Braves are now 5-time National League East champions. You love it. You love it. You love it. And the Braves don't have to be in that wild card series. Those awful Mets do. Marcus Chafin says, I'd totally buy tickets this weekend if I could find a cheaper flight last second. Yeah, the flight's always going to get you. That's tricky. I tell you what's kind of expensive. I was looking at some of the tickets for future home games. Right now, Vandy's a little bit more expensive than I sort of thought it would be. Tennessee tickets are really expensive right now. So, for sure. Let's see what else. Keith Folds talking about the video of Uga biting the Auburn player. That's one of the things. There is some great, video and images over the years in the Georgia-Auburn rivalry. Just some great stuff. You can really tell that story through pictures very well. Very well. Barry also predicting the Dogs going to release the Hornets on Saturday. Make them run for the bus, trying to get the heck out of town. I love that. Philip Jordan Wells says Eighth Rothstein knows about those slot machines. Yeah, you better believe. He doesn't want the loose slot machines in the back. He wants them up front. Yeah, and he wants to keep a clean station too. That is indeed the case. I love that movie. Robert Hosea says over the course of the next few weeks, I think we see some growth out of this young Dogs roster. Yeah, this is the time of year where I think that can happen. I do. And by the time you get to November, you're talking about a team that's in a lot of ways a good bit different than this team is right now. And I think that is what a part of this is. I mean, football season's a long, tough grind. And I think we all get better with anything that we do it. You don't really get better thinking about it or talking about it. You get better doing it. And a lot of Georgia players right now are getting that on-the-job experience. And I do think they benefit from that. Now, experience doesn't make a, limited player into a good player. But for a talented player who just needs the know-how, then experience can be really, really valuable. Really valuable. Alan McGuffin said Kirby needs to, she said Kirby said it, they need to be a striking team. He says they've been too passive this season. Yeah, I do want to see him come out. And I know Kirby did say that. I thought it was a great line there as well. Come out and strike and be physical. Listen, you kind of like leaning into your sort of alpha tendencies for a game like this. I think that's part of it. I do. Keith Vold says, from our seats there in 332 in the south stands, we can see the Memorial Hall, part of North Campus, beautiful view. Yeah, I've always felt like that the 300 level of Sanford Stadium can be a really good seat. I think the upper level, now there's a 600 level now, which is really up there, but the 300 level of Sanford Stadium, I believe, is one of the best upper levels in the SEC. I've been to a lot of the other upper level type places, and some of them kind of sit back a little bit, and so not only you're high, but you're kind of removed a little further from the action. And some of those are just not great seats. But I've sat all over over the course of my lifetime, all over that 300 level, including when I was a kid. That's where our season tickets were, in a similar area to what you're describing right now. And I used to love it from up there. I thought it was beautiful, especially on a great day. Now, if the sun's beating down, it can be hot up there, but for sure. Joel Moody, liking what he's seeing from Nolan Smith, predicting more good things. I like that, Joel. That's great to hear. JP says, just know that Robbie Ashford can fly. The dude's got wheels. Wouldn't surprise me if we have 2 sacks or less. However, I think pressure will disrupt him completely. I mean, I think this is a game to get that quarterback pressure. And as I've said before, this is what you're saying is also part of the reason why I want Stetson Bennett to run more. It's like, an unplanned running play from a quarterback is just one of the most demoralizing things for a defense. And if you look over the course of the long haul, it's one of the more efficient plays you can run. When a quarterback just, tucks the football and takes off with it, that can be a really valuable weapon. That is one of the things that Ashford does do well. DT says the upper level at Clemson requires oxygen. Yeah, my only memory of kind of being at Clemson was like in 2003, I don't know if they still have this or not, maybe they still do. They still had those like aluminum high school style bleachers for the visiting team to sit in. I remember being there in the hottest game I've ever been to. This was back in an era in which I wasn't making quite the same game day choices that I'm making now. If you get my drift on that, my game day routine was very different back then. And I just remember that being a very rough day. Probably not quite the right ratio of liquids, prior to the game. Incredibly hot. They ran out of ice in the concession stand. That was a rough day for the kid. I'm not going to lie to you. About that. Matt Rukovin says, how about we beat Auburn so bad that Tank Bixby just stays in Athens and doesn't get back on the bus? There are a lot of Georgia fans that won't be happy until Tank Bixby finally suits up and wears the Georgia uniform. That's funny. JP calling for a big game from Mikael Williams. I like that too. Justin H. says that Mikael's been a little bit quiet as of late. It'd be a good day for him to break out for sure. Basil says, I'm excited about seeing Bear Alexander. Yeah, it seems like Bear's coming on here pretty good. AU, and really, like, it does just sort of come down to this, right? AU says, eliminate the first half turnovers and come down with one of those interceptions that were dropped in the Missouri game and almost entirely different. I mean, the honest truth is, like, and everybody sort of said this, and I guess I'll join the throng, if you don't have those first quarter turnovers against Kent State and Missouri, then almost everything we've talked about the last couple of weeks just wouldn't seem all that meaningful. Like, that a lot of this is just about, a little bit of sloppy turnover play. And sometimes there are things you can do to prevent that, but honestly, there are some times when you just can't. I mean, there is a degree of, like, some of the turnover stuff that it is just sort of blind, dumb luck. Helmet hits the football at exactly the right point, or, a ball gets tipped and turned into an interception. There are just some things that are going to be a little bit out of your control with some of that. But if you do eliminate those first quarter turnovers, then honestly, it's probably been a relatively meaningless stretch of football for Georgia. And yet the presence of some of that stuff at the beginning of the game made the rest of the game feel different. I've told y'all now a few times. Like, the Missouri fans went from wishing they were playing anybody but Georgia to all of a sudden now they're like rocking and rolling, and they're doing that Timmy Trumpet song. Like, they're just getting into it. It's like, where did these people even come from? It felt like the stadium was getting fuller as the game went on. I don't know if they were just like bringing people in from the streets of Columbia or what, but it's like, during the tailgate, this is the most passive, docile fan base you'll ever see. They didn't want to be there. They just wanted to enjoy some nice weather being outside, but didn't want to really play Georgia that day. Then all of a sudden they're just breathing down their necks and just trying to make this incredible atmosphere, not incredible atmosphere, but far more intense than you thought it was otherwise going to be. Greg Dog says, quiet before the storm. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And that is important. It is important to keep that in mind, that A lot of this is about crescendoing at the right moment. It's one of the reasons why we haven't slowed down on hashtag go for 2 and 22, despite the fact that the last 2 weeks haven't been all that great for Georgia, because, as our commenter said, this is about getting ready for everything that's coming along Georgia's way. And over the course of any season, there are going to be ups and downs. One of the things I think we're going to do eventually is, so what Georgia's trying to do this year, win back-to-back national championships, go back and look at the last back-to-back national champion, Alabama in 2011, 2012. They had a lot of imperfect moments over the course of those 2 years. They lost twice over the course of that span. Lost a game to LSU, which they didn't score a touchdown. Lost a game at home to Johnny Manziel, in which they had a very hard time keeping him corralled defensively at all. So even the high, sort of the gold standard high water mark of back-to-back national champions, even they were, not certainly perfect in every game they played over the course of that time. DT says Timmy Trumpet cost Missouri that game. It's a loser song. Ask the Mets. That's exactly right. It's one of the reasons why we loved playing. Now, I will confess this. So I have a son who's like, he's 10, but he's like he's going into like his 11-year-old year. So if their fall league team, one of the parents will do like walk-up music for the batting, and he did choose the Narco song for his walk-up music, which I was actually surprised because he doesn't really care about music that much at all. And so he thinks of it as Contreras' song. He doesn't think of it as the Mets song. I actually had to tell him that the Mets, I guess, are credited with using it first. So he does like to use the song for his walk-up song. But I do think it's really funny how like obsessed the Mets have been with like how proud they are of this song, and it's their song, whatever else, and now they can play it for themselves. They play in the wild card round. I think you're absolutely right about that. We played the video the other day that one guy had made of putting like the taps, the sad song, putting taps over the actual video of Timmy Trumpet. I think that's really funny. DT, I think you're absolutely right about that. Paige Holloway says we should worry about every SEC game. Well, here's what I can tell you. I talk to enough people who talk to enough Georgia coaches to tell you the Georgia coaches are always worried about every game. That's just what they live with. I mean, I can tell you that Georgia coaches had a lot of respect for Kent State, and Kent State did not sneak up on the Georgia coaches at all. That they had spent a lot of time, even in private conversations, talking about their concern for some of the things that Kent State did well, the quarterback in particular, and that even when it's not microphone press conference time, even when there is no need for coach speak, there have been a few games this year. South Carolina game is an example of this. I had some people tell me, Georgia coaches are a little concerned about their team on the road here for the first time. That what you say you want, which is a healthy level of, I guess, allergy to any kind of overconfidence. I can promise you, Georgia coaches have that, because they're even telling people they know privately how worried they are about every single game, because that's just kind of what coaches do, right? If you've ever coached anything, you probably understand that yourself, that you just sort of worry about every small detail. So these Georgia coaches, no doubt, are spending this entire week thinking about everything that could go wrong against Auburn and envisioning what that would look like if it does, because that's just sort of the nature of coaches. And even in their private moments far away from the media, I've been told directly that's exactly what they're doing, for sure. There you go. So here's Timmy Trumpet. Now, we play this of the day. There you go. It is a loser song. I don't dislike the song, but the Mets are no doubt losers. Is that a kazoo that guy had? Yeah, that's pretty good. I like that. That's pretty good. There you go. I definitely enjoy that. Really, really funny. And the Mets are no doubt losers for sure. Brandon Griffin says, I believe in the Bulldog bump. After you play Georgia, it forces you to get better, and it shows. Look at Michigan, South Carolina bounce back. I think Missouri will play better moving forward. Could be the case. Could be the case. We'll see against Florida on Saturday. I'm not quite so sure for Missouri. I think when you come that close to winning a game and then don't, I think it does something to your team. I think it hurts you. Paul Moon wants to see a little bit more from Georgia running game, although he likes what he's seen from Kenny McIntosh through the air. I like that. Connor Hill says, who stands out for the Georgia defense on Saturday? Somebody mentioned Nolan Smith a little earlier. That seems like a good name for me. I'm kind of remembering 2019, Trayvon Walker had a really good game against Auburn. That was late in the season, a little bit different. But it'd be kind of a cool thing for Mikael Williams to kind of continue on his little Trayvon Walker path by having a good game against Auburn on Saturday too, especially being a Columbus guy. Trust me, a Columbus dog playing well against Auburn is a pretty big deal. That'll make him a very happy guy around that area. And you folks from down that part of the state understand what I'm talking about. Biscuit says Braves now went from plus 800 down to just plus 500 to win the World Series. That means they're 5-1 to win the World Series. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. I mean, listen, I absolutely think it's a possibility. Now, do the Braves have the front-end pitching? You know, obviously they've kind of shown that, you know, late in the season a little bit. But, I mean, I think they're right there in the conversation. I do. Connor Hill says Braves are elite. I would agree with that. Biscuit also calling for Javon Dumas Johnson to have a big game against the running quarterback. I think those linebackers are coming into their own a little bit. We've always said to expect a Roquan or I think that Javon Dumas Johnson may be as good a linebacker eventually that Georgia's had. But Roquan was a different player in 2017 than he was in 2016, and Nakobe was a different player last year than he was in 2020. That this is that year in which I think Javon Dumas Johnson is learning the game, much like both those guys did in their second years. But he's already proving to be a really valuable player for Georgia, and certainly he could have that big game. Savage Dog calling for 2 interceptions from Malachi Starks. I like that. That'd be a fun one to consider there, too. Let's get some comments on Facebook, and we'll get ready to get out of here. Joseph Kennedy liking what he's seeing from Tyke Smith. Yeah, you heard Kirby Smart say some nice things about him a little earlier. Brandon Griffin says, I hope that Spencer Strider gets back for us. Yeah, it's that kind of guy that I think you really need in the postseason. A guy that just misses bats. And those oblique injuries are tricky. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to know like how long they're going to last and kind of what they are all about. But a guy like that, it's that power pitcher. I mean, I think that Strider is just one of the alpha-looking dudes that we've seen here in a while. And no disrespect to Michael Harris, but I'd probably favor Strider as Rookie of the Year. But obviously Harris would be a deserving winner, but I would probably favor Strider as Rookie of the Year. So, yeah. Daniel Holtz asking about Eric Gilbert. So, Kirby talked about Gilbert yesterday. So, Wednesday is what's called an SEC teleconference day. That's like if you ever have a Zoom meeting, that's a little bit like what the SEC teleconference is, where it's like the entire SEC media gets a chance to be a part of this. I don't do it because I'm doing the show, but they get a chance to be a part of it, and all the SEC coaches pop on there. And one of the things that did come up yesterday was Gilbert, and Smart spoke a little more hopefully about him and kind of congratulating him for some of the things that he's been doing. Here's the thing you got to know is everything I have been told, and I've been told by people who would know, everything I've been told about Eric Gilbert is that Georgia is working very hard to stand beside him as he goes through a lot. And as of a couple of weeks ago, this wasn't really about football. This was kind of about kind of getting him back to a place where he sort of needed to be. And yet we also believe that football has kind of that motivation of, hey, you know, you can get back to playing the sport that you love. That can be a part of that there too. But a couple of weeks ago, this didn't really sound to me like it was much of a football topic, and it sounded more like it was a life topic based on some of what Smart said yesterday. And let me see if I can easily find the quote on this. I'll try to do this quick. Of course, I don't do anything quick, I don't think usually, but you know, it sounds like they feel like that he's done pretty well over the course of the last couple of weeks. It sounds like that's the case. Here we go. Yeah, let me give this to you. So the quote yesterday is, I'm really proud of Eric's progress and what he's done. I continue to be hopeful that he'll contribute and help us. I think the word progress there is what matters more than anything, because you know, when they didn't take him to South Carolina, they just felt that he wasn't quite, you know, ready for that yet. Or, you know, when it comes to only being able to have 70 players available to you, you know, you had to obviously make some tough choices about who that 70 is going to be. And Gilbert wasn't one of those guys. But it wasn't a punishment. It's not in a doghouse situation. Gilbert hasn't done something wrong. Gilbert's just going through a lot. And I know that can be difficult to process, but that's my understanding of what's been going on with Eric with this, and that Georgia's working really hard to continue to provide the support for him that he needs about life, more so than just being a contributing member of this football team. Now, y'all know I think that Eric, when he plays, is one of them really fun players to watch, but I don't quite know how close we are to seeing that guy again. I'm just not quite so sure about that. But it sounds like things are getting better because Kirby used the word progress there, which I think is really good. Chris Free, looking forward to Rabun County versus St. Francis here this week. Yeah, Rabun County, that's a fun team. And obviously good look at St. Francis there as well. Dana Turk, appreciate the kind words on that. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you. And Dana, I'm always glad to have you here. Joel Moody says he's not making a final score prediction. He just wants to win. I like that. Also, speaking of Rabun County, somebody said watch out for Gunner Stockton next year. It should be a fun off-season whenever you get there between Carson and Gunner and Brock. Should be a fun off-season conversation for sure. Philip Jordan Wells says I need to pull my drawstring. You want this right here? What's wrong with that? Is there something wrong with that? All right, we got to go. Final comments on YouTube. Paul Moon says quarterback's going to be interesting next year. Seems like it's Beck's to lose, but we'll see. Yeah, there's clearly an advantage of being the number 2 quarterback, but I also think there's some value in being the number 4 quarterback there as well because you're getting a chance to work really hard at the scout team. Plus, I've heard a lot of good things about Gunner Stockton. Now, listen, we hear a lot of good things about a lot of Georgia players because, for lots of different reasons, but it should be interesting. I think that obviously Brock Vandegrift's still a big part of this too. Stephen Ford calls Stetson Bennett to bump up his Heisman stock this game, and Washington and Bowers are both going to go hard. I got to tell you this. If Georgia's just like sort of raining down these passes to tight ends on Saturday, I'll be the happiest guy in the world because a lot of y'all know. I think they do need to make a concerted effort to get the ball to Bowers more. I think he should touch the ball 10 times on Saturday. And I'd like to see more for Washington as well. Let's see what else. Paul Moon said the silence on Brock Vandegrift was a little concerning to me. So I'll be very honest with you. For a while last year, I thought there was a lot of silence around Carson Beck too. And my first thought was, well, gosh, you're not really hearing anything. So maybe this is an example of no news not being good news. But the truth is we've seen Beck play a couple times this year, and he looks fine, right? I mean, and they clearly were confident enough in him to make him the number 2 quarterback. So I would not read into, because I would agree with you. I think it's really quiet on the Brock Vandegrift front. I do. We've seen Beck with our own eyes. We hear good things about Gunner Stockton. And on Vandegrift, just kind of quiet. And I can understand why somebody would say, ooh, maybe that means that he's falling behind these other two. But I'm telling you, last year there was a period of time in which you weren't hearing boo about Carson Beck. You weren't hearing nothing about Carson Beck. And come to find out, that silence was not indication of him not being, a worthy competitor for this job because he's the number 2 quarterback right now. So I understand where you're coming from. I had a similar thought about Beck last year, and as it turns out, it was not an accurate assessment of the situation. Let's see what else. I guess we got to go. I promised y'all long comments. Hopefully I've paid off on that promise. So thanks for being here. Have a good afternoon. By the way, check out the AJC as the Braves get everything set up for a run in the division series that starts once the loser teams like the Mets scuffle their way around the wild card. You can get all you need to know, but the Braves getting set up for all of that online, ajc.com. Also, almost certainly, and this is, certainly transitioning back away from what we're the happy stuff we normally talk about. But if you want more information about, what's going on with Elijah DeWitt, I'm sure the AJC will have coverage of that there too. This is kind of a big Atlanta news story as it is before you even, come to grips with the fact this was a fairly well-known high school football player that was involved in this situation. And I can't tell you how sad this has made me. I know that you all feel the same way about that. I was glad Terence said what he said. My intention was to bring it up. And I just used Terence bringing it up as a way of talking about it during the show. But I'm sure you'll be able to read more about that online at ajc.com as well. And Falcons obviously have a big game coming up against the Bucs on Sunday, so there'll be plenty of that there too. So check out all of that online at the AJC, ajc.com. And to our friends at R.S. Andrews who bring this portion of the show to you, the R.S. Andrews Cooldown. You can find them online rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that. So find them there today. A water heater goes out. In many cases, RS Andrews can replace it for you the same day. But you've got to find them online at rsandrews.com. Have a great day. We will see you back here tomorrow for DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. We'll look forward to talking to you then.